Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Hello, this is Guineith Isaacs speaking here. There's no Vincent today. He's busy with his farm work, so it's just me today. And Jason is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota, and I'm calling from Australia, from the People's Republic of Victoria, governed by our glorious dictator Dan Andrews. You'll note the sarcasm in my voice there. So anyway, I won't mention him anymore on the broadcast today because he's, we just have to deal with what he does out here. No, what I'm going to be talking about today is what you do. This whole broadcast actually is inspired by Charles from Ohio, and he called up the show, I think, on Monday, and he said, what do you do if you're in a situation where you have very, very little money and you have to make do, and maybe winter's coming on and you live in a cold climate and you have to make do, you have to keep warm, and you have to, basically survive in a subsistence setting when you have an extremely low income. And when Charles said that, if he's listening at the moment, by the way, he's welcome to call in. Other people are also welcome to call in, but I can't see your names. But if you want to call in, then I'm sure that Jason will be able to handle your call and fix it all up so that we can be on air together. The call-in line is 866-582-9933. So if Charles from Ohio wants to call in, or if anybody wants to call in, they're quite welcome to call in, and I'm sure that Jason will be able to patch the call through. Although I can't see, because I'm calling from my cell phone, I can't see who the callers are. So I'm just going to have to rely on what Jason tells me there. Now, I think that it's appropriate right now to just talk about a little bit of my background. For most of my adult life, I've lived on a very, very low income. And there have been times in my life where I've actually been homeless. And fortunately, I'm not homeless anymore, and I'm never going to be homeless again, God willing. Bless the living God for that. I live on a 20-acre homestead in country Victoria, and in an off-the-grid adobe mud brick farmhouse. And I have my own water supply, and I have my own electrical supply, and I grow a lot of my own food, not all of my own food, but I grow some of my own food, and that, I'm growing more of my food all the time. The idea in the end is so that I'm eventually going to be growing most of my own food. But the thing is that I've managed to put all this together with some help from family members who had a bit more money than I did. But I am able to get this homestead established on quite a low income, and I would like to share a bit today of some tips and tricks if you find yourself in a very low income setting, maybe you're a homeless person, maybe you're a person who just has a very low income, who's living on disability or unemployment benefits or something like that. Now, what Charles was talking about was he was talking about the problem of keeping warm in a cold climate when you don't have much income. And as soon as he mentioned that, I remembered something that a little trick that my dad taught me many, many, many years ago. And my dad had always lived in quite good circumstances. But when he got married, they moved into an off-the-grid farm, small farm of about 17 acres. And initially they had no electricity. And Dad built his own house, and he set up the water supply. He drilled a well, and he set up a windmill, and he set up tanks, and that was how he established the water supply. But one trick that I remembered him doing when I was a little girl was that he would get an old paint can, a 1-gallon paint can, 4 litres, and what he would do is he would make a hole in the side of the paint can at the bottom of it, maybe about 2 inches by 4 inches, 2 inches by 3 inches, or 2 inches by 4 inches at the bottom of the paint can. And he would have the top of the paint can open, and what he would do is he would use the hole at the bottom that he'd made at the bottom of the paint can as a stoking hole. And he would make a highly efficient little stove out of this paint can. And when I asked him as a child, Dad, where did you learn to do that? He said, I've always known how to do that. My pa taught me. That was his grandpa. Now, although Granddad had always lived in quite fortunate circumstances prior to his marriage, prior to moving out to the farm, which he eventually established into quite a good farm, by the way, what he did, his grandfather lived in very, very impoverished circumstances. His name was called Pa Shearing, and he came from Shepherd's Bush in London. His whole family was from there. They had been there, as long as anybody could remember. But when Pa Shearing was living in Shepherd's Bush as a little boy, it was during the Victorian era, and the circumstances of his life were positively, they were from something out of a Charles Dickens novel. They really were. They were extremely poor. And yet, people made do. And what they would do is they would get old cans of paint, and they would make a hole in the bottom, and they would use the top, the open top, as a chimney. And you could cook on it. And what my dad used to do was he used to use it as a miniature forge. So he would put a hot iron in there, a hot poker in there, and he would heat it red hot, and he would use it to maybe solder. He would use it to maybe do some welding or to do hot poker work designs on wood. When he was younger, he had horses, and he used to use this type of forge for doing his horseshoeing. And very small forge, very portable, very lightweight. And if you were a homeless person, it would be something that you could very, very easily fit into your pack. And I've seen them made online out of even bean cans. Okay? Maybe that would be a little bit too small. I think that the optimal size for this type of stove would probably be about a 4 to 10 litre can. Okay, that would be the optimal size. I would say that if you were living as a homeless person, probably the 4 litre or the 1 gallon can would be better. Now these cans, they're sometimes used for paint, but they're also sometimes used, you get similar cans with oil in them. And often at fast food restaurants, they have larger cans that they have cooking oil in these cans. They usually have them stacked out at the back. They usually have just way too many of them. And often they're even filled with oil, which is probably even better if they have used cooking oil in them. You could ask the manager if you could have one of these, used oil cans, either empty or full, and they'd be more than glad to get rid of them because they take up space. They're messy, and they have to actually pay somebody often to get rid of them. So they're happy if people, often they're happy. And if they're not, then just go down the road and find another fast food restaurant, and I'm sure that you'll be able to find one very easily. Like I say, it's very easy to turn even that sort of can into a portable stove to cook on and to have some heat. You get a knife or an axe or anything, basically it's not very thick metal. It's very, very easy to cut through. So even something like an old-fashioned can opener that Vincent Finelli talks about, or a screwdriver or anything, basically, pair of tin snips, probably even one of these very strong pairs of scissors that you come across sometimes. Cut a hole in the bottom and you just bend the steel out and it can form a little spark catcher. Even if you don't take that little piece of metal off, it can form a little spark catcher, okay, which can be handy. Or you can cut it off. It's up to you. And just make sure you hammer down any sharp edges. And then the original hole that would have formed the chimney spout, you get any plastic spouts off of it with, once again, a knife. And you just use that original pouring hole as the chimney. And if you leave the top of the stove intact, the top of the can intact, it can actually form something of a hot plate. So you can put cooking pots, fry pans, or whatever on there. Now, this is a way that you can keep warm. It burns using small twigs and sticks up to about maybe an inch or an inch and a half long. I can hear music, but I'm going to continue this conversation on the other side of the break. So make sure you stay tuned, and I look forward to speaking to you all soon. Hello there, Claire. This is Guineith Isaacs speaking. Vincent's busy with some farm work again today, so I'm keeping the chair warm for him. And today we're discussing about what to do if you find yourself in extremely impoverished circumstances, and how you can get by, how you can stay warm, how you can stay motivated, how you can look after yourself and look after those who are dependent on you. Now, I was talking about how to make a simple stove out of an old cooking oil can or paint can. It's got to be a lifesaver. This has got to be the most important thing to have at your disposal if you find yourself in extremely impoverished circumstances. And I would say that if you ever find yourself there, okay, and you might think that that's never ever going to happen to you. Well, I thought it would never ever happen to me as well. but I was forced by circumstances beyond my control to leave where I was in a hurry with my children. And we ended up living as homeless people for around about 2 months. And this was some years ago now. This was at the end of 2012 that this happened. And we moved on to the farm that I'm living on, that I own, at the beginning of 2013. But getting back to the can stove, if you thought you can improve its function even more if you have a supply of bricks at your disposal, okay? You can stack the bricks around the outside of the stove. This works even better if it happens to be a rectangular oil can, by the way. But even if it's a round can, you can still find that you'll be able to stack bricks in a circle around the cooking oil can. And what that will do, the bricks will heat up and it will create what's called thermal mass, which means that the bricks will absorb heat from the fire that you've built in the can. And they will, it's more of a radiant heat than just the heat that comes, just from the fire as it is. It's the difference between getting heat from a fireplace and getting heat from a hot piece of iron, which is the stove that the fireplace is made from, okay, or the brickwork that the fireplace is made from. Well, you can do this, you can either do it just with dry bricks, just stacking them around the outside of the can, very close as you can, so that the bricks are actually touching the metal. Or if you know that you're going to be in that location for some time, what you can do is you can use mud or earth to make a kind of mortar and use that to stick the bricks together. And what that will do, it'll improve the thermal mass of your impromptu stove even more. And it'll help to make it a tiny bit more permanent. Of course, it won't be completely permanent because, you don't have any permanency when you're a homeless person. That more or less goes without saying. But if you have them just stacked up without any mortar in between them, like any clay or any earth as mortar, you can just stack them up. And then at the end of the evening, when you get the fire, when you're at the stage where you're getting the fire to die down, you can get the bricks when they're cool enough to touch, and you can wrap them in cloth, or you can just even put them in your bedding as is, and it will help to keep your bedding warm. And this literally could be the difference between life and death. And obviously, don't be silly about it. Don't go putting burning hot bricks in your bed. That's just stupid. What I'm talking about is if you put the bricks when they're actually cool enough to touch, but still warm, then you put them in the bed. And we're heading for the bottom of the hour break. Hello, everybody. This is Guineith Isaacs speaking here. Keeping the chair warm for Vincent today. He had some farm work to do, so, yep, I'm here. And I'm basically talking today, having a conversation about, which is inspired by Charles from Ohio, about what to do to keep warm if you find yourself in extremely impoverished circumstances. This is on the level where you are either sheltering in place, where you've got no utilities, or if you're homeless or some type of circumstance like that, especially since in many parts of the United States, well, in the whole of the United States, it's winter at the moment, but in many parts of the U.S., it's extremely cold right now. Okay. Another thing you can do, I mentioned before the break about the oil can stoves or the paint can stoves, putting bricks around them. There is another thing that you can do, and that is you can make a surround around the fireplace, which will help to bounce the heat back on you. And you can do this, you can build it up with rocks, or if you're fortunate enough to have sheet metal and some sticks, then you can make a sort of a backdrop to the fireplace with pieces of sheet metal. And what this will do, it'll help to protect the fire from wind. And obviously you locate the shelter so that it's going to block the fire from the prevailing wind direction, okay? But as well as that, it will help to balance the heat. Okay. I just dropped out there for a moment. I'm not quite sure what happened. But, yeah, we were talking about making a buffer for your fire from the wind, and how if you do that, either with rocks or with sheet metal or with whatever other material you happen to have on hand, you can do that, and it will help to bounce the heat back onto you instead of that heat getting lost to the environment. And the other thing that it will do is it will help to provide a little bit of privacy for your campsite. And this is very, very important. When you are living as a homeless person, you have to look after your mental health, your psychology, okay? And the one thing that really gets to a lot of people with living as a homeless person is the lack of stability, the lack of structure, and the lack of simple safety in their life. And that is a fundamental psychological need that we all have. We all need to feel safe. And if you are forced to live for a prolonged period of time in an unsafe environment, it can really, really mess with your mind. I'm not even kidding. And this is one of the reasons why homelessness is just such a multifaceted issue. But one thing that really begins to wear down on homeless people's psychology after a while is the simple lack of safety. They can never feel like they have any security. And it may seem a silly thing to think that a couple of pieces of sheet metal placed behind your fire to bounce the heat back on you could help to improve your sense of safety. But it is absolutely marvelous. It's just a simple psychological barrier between you and the rest of the world. But it can make you feel safer, it can make you feel warmer, and it can actually make you sleep a bit better. And if you are living as a homeless person, it is an absolute godsend to be able to get a good night's sleep. It really, really is. And yeah, this is it. You've got to think of these things. And I don't think that Charleston, Ohio is quite at that level of poverty at the moment. I seem to get the sense that he is in some sort of housing situation where he's just in a really, really basic level of housing, but not necessarily. I don't know his personal circumstances. I'm kind of guessing here, but maybe with not too much access to utilities. So, like I said, I'm guessing, but this is. I've been in even more limited circumstances than that. I've been in circumstances in my life where I've had to live in a tent and with two small children, with my two sons at the time. My two sons are both now grown men, and they're doing quite well in the world. But this is it. This is what you have to think of. And the other thing that's really, really important is to keep yourself active, keep your mind busy, and keep your hands busy doing stuff, making stuff, and thinking about stuff, contemplating life. And if you get the chance to make something, either to, make something that will make your life a bit easier out of junk that you happen to find lying around the place, or if you're an artist, then maybe do some art. Use this as an opportunity to engage in some creativity. Even if it means going up the road and going to an art supply shop and buying a few art supplies for, you might think, oh gosh, that's a lot of money. And when you're homeless, sometimes $10 or $20 is a lot of money, but your inner health, the health of your soul, will really benefit from having that something to do, okay? Something to think about, something to contemplate. And then when you look out in the world, you're not just seeing a blank landscape. You're seeing all the possibilities of things to draw, for instance. I don't know if you're an artist or not, but this is what I'm saying. Or you can make devices to make your life easier. For example, let's say you come across a can on the road, then you can take that can home, and if it's got BPA in it, then obviously it's not a good idea to use it as a cooking pot. But if it doesn't have BPA in it, you could make it into a cooking pot. Okay, just simply by getting a nail and banging a couple of holes in the side of it and putting a piece of old fencing wire or something, or whatever you happen to have on hand, through each of the holes, and then you've got a little cooking pot. And, something, I still make repairs on old pots with pieces of fencing wire sometimes. New handles for kettles. Sometimes I'll have a kettle that I've gotten from the shop, and it always seems that the Bakelite handles go on them, because I think that what it is I still have wood-fired stoves, and I think that these handles are made for using with gas-fired stoves, and just something about the heat of the wood fire isn't very good for the plastic handles on these little tea kettles that you get to put on top of your stove. Not electric ones, of course. When that happens, I get a piece of fencing wire. Instead of throwing the kettle away, because there's nothing wrong with the kettle, I get a piece of fencing wire and I twist it and I make a new handle for it. And it's good to go, and it's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. And I feel happy. And, something, even a simple thing like that, there's a real sense of accomplishment when you've done that. And when you finish, even just that sort of simple type of repair of getting an old kettle that doesn't have a handle and making a new handle for it out of some fencing wire, there's a sense of accomplishment that comes with that, and it's a real buzz. It makes you feel happy. And this is the sort of thing that is really, really important to remember and to realize when you're in these sorts of impoverished circumstances, whether you are homeless or whether you whether you do have a home, but it's on a pretty basic level. It's really, really important to keep a positive attitude, keep busy, keep doing things, okay? And you'll find that you are always on the lookout, okay? When you're going out and about, you sort of, I don't know if you would be able to, leave your campsite for the day, depending on where it was, as is, or if there was a chance of it getting robbed, or if you would have to pack up your camp each time you left it. But either way, you should go out and about and explore your surroundings, probably at least once a day. Now, by doing that, you can assess what's going on in your local environment, how many other homeless people there are living in your area. If I ever had to be homeless again, I would not want to live in an area where there were a lot of other homeless people. I've always tended to be kind of a lone wolf. I haven't really changed. And I would certainly say that you have fewer problems living as a homeless person when it's just you and any dependents that you might have. Okay, I think that we are heading into another break. Hello, everybody. This is Guineith Isaacs speaking here, keeping the chair warm for Vincent today because he has some farm work to get caught up on before the winter really fully sets in. Anyway, we're talking today how to really live as a person in extremely impoverished circumstances. Okay? And before the break, I was talking about how you should try and get up and have a look around in your immediate area, probably at least once a day, because you can find a lot of things out through this. You should try and learn to move without really being seen too much yourself, okay? And I mentioned before the break that if you have to live as a homeless person, it's often not a good idea to move into a homeless camp because, it depends on the individual, I suppose, but with other people come problems, really, and just, people are often homeless for a reason, and so they're generally sorting through some issue or another in their own life. But you might find that on your out and about walk that you come across a patch of vegetation of plants that you know to be edible. Now, with regards to foraging for plants, I would really advise doing your homework before you try new plants, okay? I would advise getting a field guide, okay? You can often get them from second-hand bookshops for, a very small amount of money. A field guide to local plants, edible and medicinal plants. You may even be lucky to come across a book by somebody like Marjorie Wildcraft, who is also a USA Prepares instructor. But yes, this is it. But if you know that a certain plant is edible and you come across a large patch of it, then you should certainly take notice of it. Take notice of the fact that it's there. If you're walking along the road and you find some fresh, the emphasis being fresh, roadkill, of course it's going to be beneficial for you if you cut off a joint of meat and take it home and roast it on your fire. Of course that's going to be good for you. That should, you should not even think twice about that as long as it's fresh meat. And how do you tell if it's fresh? Well, if it's from the night before, and if you go for your walk early in the day, which I would recommend going early in the day rather than later in the day because the early bird catches the worm, then the carcass will still have fairly intact eyes, and eyes that look as if they're freshly dead, okay? And you can tell after a while, that's one of the first things. I apologize if there's anyone in the class who's squeamish. You might want to tune out for like 30 seconds or whatever. You know what the eye of, after a while, you know what the eye of a creature that has not been long dead looks like with as opposed to a creature that's been dead for a few days. And if it's been dead for any length of time, it probably won't have any eyes, because the ravens and the crows and all the rest of them, buzzards and all that, they come and they pick the eyes out. They just do that. And also the nose, okay? So if you get a carcass, roadkill deer or whatever, here in Australia, it would tend to be kangaroo rather than deer, although I have seen roadkill deer. The nose. You can smell if a carcass is fresh, and you can smell if a carcass is not fresh. So that's another thing to take into consideration. But the other thing is, if the hide is still in reasonably good condition, you might want to consider salvaging that as well. And this is it. You've got to be active constantly, keeping your mind active, keeping your hands active, to stop yourself from dwelling too much on your circumstances, okay? Because as soon as you do that, you begin to go down as a homeless person. That's just how it is. Okay, I think we're heading into the top of the hour news. I'll continue this conversation after the news, more focusing on what to do when you begin to get established in a place again, a place of your own, that is. Hello, this is Guineith Isaacs speaking here, keeping this chair warm for Vincent Finelli. He's busy doing some farm work today, just getting caught up on the last few things just before the winter really sets in. And we're talking today about how you live in a really, really impoverished set of circumstances. And this is a situation that I suspect a lot of people in the class either are going through at the moment, or they will be very, very soon. And I had a period of time of about 2 months a number of years ago when I was homeless with my 2 young sons. At the time they were young. Now they are not, they're young men now. So, but at the time they were boys. And, so I had the added responsibility. So it wasn't just me, myself, homeless. It was me, myself, homeless, looking after 2 young children. And that is a circumstance that I would not wish on anyone. But we got through it. And through a particular set of events, I managed to find my way into a trailer park, which was quite a nice trailer park, actually. But following that, I was able to buy the farm that I'm now living on. And when I left the place where I was, I actually owned my own home. And it was a really bad set of circumstances that I was leaving, but I did own my own home there outright, and it was really hard to have to leave it. It was probably one of the toughest decisions I've ever made. But I sold that home, and from the proceeds of that sale, I was able to buy the farm that I'm on now. And one of the big lessons from being homeless to having 20 acres of land with a house on it was really quite amazing. And this wasn't the first time that I'd owned a farm. I did have a farm earlier on, which I sold stupidly sold to buy the house in the suburbs. Never should have done that, but anyway, that doesn't matter. To go from being homeless to being in a trailer park for, a month or 2 to then moving on to this 20-acre farm was really quite amazing at the time. And one thing that really stuck out when we moved on to this place was the comparative abundance of resources. Okay, that I actually had this 2-bedroom house, which is my house, which was kind of neat, and it was a mud brick house, and it was kind of old. It's still kind of old, and it's not a flash house by any stretch of the imagination. But I was able to begin making it home, and I was able to recover from the trauma of all of the things that had happened before. I had a 17,500 litre tank, and I had money left over from the sale of my house. So I bought an additional 22,500 litre tank, which meant that I now have 40,000 litres of water storage. And that gets us through. So, because sometimes it doesn't rain here for 5 or 6 months at a time. And I knew that because I knew what it was to live in semi-arid Australia, because I'd lived homeless in arid Australia for the last couple of months. Before that, arid and semi-arid Australia at various places. Camping my way with my 2 sons across the Nullarbor. That's basically how we did it with a 1-ton camper van. But yeah, this was it. And I used some of the money that I had left over to buy a second-hand off-the-grid solar electrical supply, because the house had a generator that the seller said that they wanted their generator back, that it was not included in the terms of the sale, but that they would give me a little while to find other, electrical solutions. So it was by the hand of God that this second-hand solar electric system came on the market together with nickel-ion battery. And this is it. It was but for maybe the first 6 months of living in this house, we had very little electricity. I don't think we had any electricity because I didn't know how the nickel-ion system worked. I had no idea how to put it together. And it was a very, very steep learning curve. And I eventually was able to contact an electrician who knew about off-grid solar power systems, and he was able to tell me what to do, what all the different components were. But even without the solar power system put together, just basically having it there in bits for about 6 months and not really knowing what to do with it, it was still much better than living homeless out in the middle of nowhere. And eventually I was able to put the solar power system together. I got it up and running, and it was the most amazing feeling to put it all together, to turn it on, and to actually have electric light at night for the first time in a very long time. That was quite amazing. And it's something I will never really forget, This farm had been abandoned for, quite some time, and it had changed hands about 6 times in the previous 10 years prior to me buying it. So it had a lot of things on it that were run down, and I've gradually been fixing them and fixing them and fixing them and fixing them. And it's a thing of keeping yourself busy. Now, when people come to the farm, they notice the changes, they notice the fencing, especially if they haven't seen me in a while. And inevitably what they say is, wow, you have been busy. And I say, yes, I know. Because there's sensors, there's water tanks, there's a solar power system put together. That was, like I said, that happened about 6 months after we moved in. But nevertheless, it was an achievement at the time. There's been, dams put in, new dams put in that weren't here before. There's gravity pressure tanks up on towers. So when I moved in here, they had the tower for the gravity pressure tank. So you pump water up into the tank, and it gravity feeds through the pipes of the house. And in most off-grid, or in many older off-grid systems where you have an off-grid water supply, that's often how you get pressure in the pipes. The other solution is to have a pressure pump. But that uses electrical current all the time, and I wasn't happy to use electrical current all the time because I knew that electrical current was something that was kind of a precious commodity here. But yeah, that's it. To have gone from being homeless to being in a home in a very basic set of circumstances and having to build your life from there. And like I said, now I have, it's still a very hard life. We heat our house with wood, and I generally have to get either myself or my son. My youngest son is still at home. My oldest son has left home. He's, he's the man now. He's, got a job and all the rest of it. It's usually either me or my youngest son or both of us. We go out and we have to get, this is another question that came up, how much wood? For us, we would use between 1 and 3 produce boxes of wood. This is the banana boxes. They'd be about 2 feet long by about 18 inches wide by about 18 inches deep. You get them from the grocery store. They're often wax-coated greengrocers produce boxes. We would use between 1 and 3 of those a day, depending on the time of year and what we're doing. And, that has to be chopped every single day. And we don't really store wood here because we live in such a semi-arid climate in a eucalyptus forest of 20 acres that any time we need wood, we just go up into the forest and we get wood. And the wood, because eucalyptus trees have this habit of dropping branches. Okay, the branches, they get to a certain age and they just drop them off the side of the tree, so you don't go up in the eucalyptus forest during a high wind. So if you know there's a high wind coming, then you get all your wood ahead of time. But it's always dry. And eucalyptus wood tends to have low moisture levels, and it tends to have high oil and resin content, and so even if it's quite green, it still burns well, but it's quite hard and it's quite dry. So even if it has been raining for quite some time, the outside of the wood will be wet, but the inside is basically never waterlogged. That's our environment. So we don't need to have vast piles of seasoned wood because it's just there in the forest all the time anyway. This is it. But I believe that living for that season as a homeless person prepared me for moving on to this place and really made me appreciate it. It helped to give me the skills to properly develop it, because so much of what I've developed on this place has come through what I've been able to forage from the surrounding landscape. And I can hear the music again, and so I think we're heading into another break. Hello, this is Guineith Isaacs speaking here, keeping the chair warm for Vincent. He has some farm work to do today. And we're discussing what it was like for me to go from being a homeless person with my two young sons at the time. They're not young sons anymore. They're grown men now. But, you know, what it was like to then transition to being on my own farm. And I found that I had this, you know, after moving on to the farm, I found that I always had my eyes open. I was always foraging, okay? I think that was a habit that I developed when I was homeless, because when you're homeless and you see something that could be useful, you pick it up and you take it back to your camp. And because this object that you think could be useful, it could be the difference between life and death down the track. And it's an unfortunate thing. That's why a lot of homeless camps end up just looking really, really cluttered and messy. Because, you know, the people, they develop this habit of foraging, and I still have the habit of foraging. You know, I can scarcely bear to throw anything out. Of course, things have to be thrown out, and I go through phases of just purging stuff. I'm thinking, well, gee, I'll just have to get a dumpster in and just, you know, do the dumpster thing. And, you know, in my life, once or twice I have done that. And I've had a couple of periods of homelessness and then moving back into houses and onto farms and all of that. But like I say, this is it. Foraging. I found that at the time I had a 1-ton farm truck, and I'd be driving around and I would see a patch of useful plants. And so I would stop. Like a favorite useful plant of mine is Agave americana. Okay? And Agave americana is such a useful plant because you plant it around the boundaries of your property and it stops people from just jumping over your fence in the middle of the night. And, you know, they get a bit of a surprise if they do. But as well as that, the leaves contain a very, very strong fibre, and they make a very excellent rope. And as well as that, the young leaves, you can dice them up and you can eat them. You can fry them up and you can eat them. And the Aztecs in Mexico and the other tribes in Mexico have known, and also the southwest of the United States where agaves come from originally, have known about the edibility of young agave leaves for many thousands of years. And it's starchy, but it's quite filling, nourishing food. And you can spice it up with a lot of other interesting foods. My sons don't much like it, so I hardly ever cook it. But it's something that's there. And agave, for that and other reasons, is a very, very useful plant. So, you know, a few times when shortly after I'd moved onto this place, I would go to a local agave patch and I would just spend several hours just filling up the tray of my farm truck with agave suckers, you know, agave pups, as they're called. That's what I would do. And, you know, I would have friends give me, you know, vast quantities of various succulents, and they would be clearing out their cactus gardens, and they would just say, hey, you want to have, you know, maybe 30, 40, 50 little cactuses? And I'd say, yeah, sure. I'd take them home and I'd plant them. And I think my record is that once I brought home 5,000 or thereabouts small cactuses and put them in the tray of the ute. But they were in pots, they were in big clumps. But I worked it out, that's how many were there. Keeping the chair warm for Vincent today. And I'm just discussing, how it was for me when I transitioned from being a homeless person to living in a trailer park for a short time to then, moving on to my current 20-acre farm. And I was mentioning about how I would have friends. I found that I was able to make friends where in the area that I moved to. This was through the local church, but it was also just through, as I recovered from the trauma of all the things that had happened, which I'm not going to go into today. I just found that I began to connect with people within my local community. And one of the things that I found a number of people did was they gave me cactuses. And sometimes I would get 100 or more cactuses at a time given to me by people who just wanted to help me out. And these would be Opuntia ficus indica, and they would be various species of agaves, and they would be, there's a cactus called Echinopsis, which is a little hedgehog-shaped cactus. I think it's called the Christmas lily cactus. And, but there's all these different types of cactuses and succulents as well. And at the time I got them and and as well as that I'd be out and about driving and I would just see big patches of cactuses just growing in the forest, and I would stop and I would just dig them up and put them in the back of the ute and then take them home. And that wasn't a problem because these are regarded as being something of a nuisance here in Australia when they're on roadside verges and such places. And that's the other one that I grow a lot of is the organ pipe cactus. What is it? Cereus cactus. And it's spelled Cereus. And so I would find that I would be getting all these cactuses. I took them home and I planted them, and then after I planted them, I went on the internet and I began to research what I had, and I found that they were edible, they were fruit bearing, they were good for fiber, that they were good for the soil. Of course, I knew that the Ficus indica, prickly pear, was a very excellent eating cactus. But there are other sorts of Opuntias as well. And I learned that they all had edible fruit. And, this was it. And as I speak, I've just finished processing a batch of other type of Opuntia that I have growing on my land, that I planted on my land. And, putting some stevia leaves in with it and making quite a nice syrup, which my son and I will eat over the next couple of days with our breakfast cereal. And, this is it. I found that all this activity was therapeutic. And not only that, planting the cactuses, nurturing them into life, seeing them grow, seeing them produce fruit in abundance, fruit that was a resource that I could eat myself, that would help with my, that I could make into preserves, into jams and chutneys and other sorts of preserves, that help with the food, that really were a big help with the food supply here. Not only that, and then the skins can feed the chickens and, all of this sort of thing. It's therapy. It's absolutely wonderful to nurture something like that into life it has helped me to recover and to maybe be some of the person that I used to be, except maybe even better. Because now, having gone through this whole process, one thing that I would say that's really different about me is I am a lot tougher. And this is it. You've got to realize that everything in life happens for a purpose. And even the utterly horrible stuff doesn't have to destroy you. If you take that as an opportunity to toughen up and push through, it's okay to cry. It's okay to even be a little bit despairing. But at the end of the day, what you have to do is you have to get on your knees and you have to pray to God and you have to ask for help. And then you have to get up and you have to start doing something. That's my best advice that I can give to anybody who is facing an extremely impoverished set of circumstances. And maybe you haven't got a bunch of land at your disposal. But what you can do is you can go out in your local area and you can start to forage in public spaces. And you can go on the internet and you can research what wild edible plants are in your area. And you might even be surprised with what you come across. You might come across an old fruit orchard growing on some neglected land quite near your farm. And if it's growing there, if it's obviously not being looked after for many, 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 many years, you know, and if you cannot possibly find the owner, then, you know, I'm not saying to go and take the fruit off of a obviously looked after orchard, okay? That would just be flat out wrong. If you can see that the orchard is being looked after, that's somebody's livelihood. They're depending on that fruit to go and sell it to make a living for themselves. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you get abandoned homesteads with the house falling down, the fences are a shambles, the weeds are growing a metre high around the trunks. You know, the trees haven't been pruned in 10 years, and yet you go there in season and they're full of apples, for instance. You know, this is it. On that sort of homestead, the fruit's only going to go to waste otherwise, you know. Or you might just find an apple tree growing by the wayside. You might, by the roadside. And, you know, I probably wouldn't normally like to eat fruit from a tree that's grown right on the roadside. But if it's a difference between eating that fruit and starving, then probably it's better to eat the fruit and rest. You know, maybe peel it. Maybe peel the fruit before you eat it, instead of starving. This is the sorts of decisions that you make as a homeless person. But yeah, if you are wandering in bushland or forest, you may be surprised with what you find. You may find a whole patch of a particular herb that you positively identify and you know to be edible, and you can keep going back and you can keep picking it. And that could be the difference between you starving and you not starving. But it's a thing of becoming aware of your surroundings. This is what you have to do. You know, so these are some of the lessons that I learned, and I haven't forgotten them now that I'm on my homestead. The difference is that I planted these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cacti that I were given, and now they are producing food for me. They are improving the soil. Apuntias especially are absolutely marvelous for the soil. if you look at the soil around the roots of a prickly pear, an opuntia cactus, any of them, then especially when it starts to rain, the soil immediately around the roots of a prickly pear cactus is always a shade or two darker than the regular soil, because they seem to attract soil microbes and soil fungi and all the little worms and bugs and grubs and all of the rest of it that help to make the soil alive. They just do. And they're so beneficial. You can eat the pads, the young pads, or even the older pads, slightly older pads, if you just scrape the prickles off. And then you cut them up and you can put them in a soup, or you can fry them. In Mexico they call this dish nopalito, and they eat it all the time. They consider it a luxury, a delicacy, to have nopalito, which is prickly pear pads. It depends. There is some species of opuntia have internal spines. You might want to avoid those for eating, but the fruit on them can still be nice. But this is it. And then you've got another plant, another succulent, not a cactus because it doesn't really have spikes, but it's called tree aeonium. It's Aeonium arboreum, okay? And it's sometimes called that there is a dark purple or a black variety, and there's a green variety. Both of them are good to eat. They're called house leek plants. They taste like house leeks, but unlike house leeks, they really thrive in the type of semi-arid climate that I live in. And not only that, rabbits absolutely adore them. They think they're so yummy. And because of that, I've got maybe several hundred Aeonium arboreum plants growing around here. Not all of them are full-sized yet, but I have enough mature Aeoniums to feed my rabbits, which is good because it's highly nourishing. It keeps them in good condition, and they keep growing all summer long. And they grow best of all during the winter, but they produce green stuff and really, really nourishing food for myself and for my rabbits all the year round. And, of course, there's I mentioned the agave americana. That's another food that the rabbits enjoy as well, is the agave leaves. Yeah, I can hear the music again. So we're just heading up to the last short segment at the end of the broadcast after the break. And I would just like to close with some encouraging messages to the class out there, especially all the people who might be having a hard time at the moment. Hello there, this is Guineith Isaacs here, keeping the seat warm for Vincent. This is the last segment, and I just want to, in this last segment, encourage anybody who is facing a really limited set of circumstances to keep your chin up, because it is possible to, it's not the end of your life when your circumstances become more restrictive, okay? And the key to having a happy and successful life in these sorts of circumstances that, like maybe there's been a job loss and suddenly you're going from a big fat pay packet to, unemployment benefits or no income at all is even worse. Keep yourself busy. Have a look and see, what your circumstances really are, and see what's going to serve your purposes in the future and what isn't going to serve your purposes in the future, okay? If you can reduce your outgoings, you should definitely do so. This is it. But the most important thing is see this time as an opportunity rather than as an ending and, oh, woe is me and now I can't do X, Y, or Z anymore, blah, blah, blah. What you can do is you can say, well, I've got my backyard or, I've got my balcony of my apartment, and, I can't really go out too much anymore, so I'm going to, like I say, if you have an apartment just with a balcony, maybe you could even keep a few rabbits on the balcony, grow some tomatoes, grow some lettuces. Go with what you have and go with, try and keep a positive mind. Try and keep a positive attitude. Keep your hands busy and keep your mind busy, keep your spirit busy, and stay positive. Yeah, I know that I've said that about 4 times in the last 5 minutes, but that is the most important thing to realize. And when you go out and about, keep your eyes open. Always be looking for resources that you can use. And because, sometimes you come across the most unusual things and things that can actually be really, really helpful and useful to you. So, yeah, this is what you have to do. The other thing I'd like to say in closing, because I'm aware that we really are at the last few minutes of this broadcast, don't expect things to go back to the way they were. They are not going to go back to the way that they were, ever. So it's just, that they're saying on the news media about the new normal and the great reset and all this sort of stuff. A lot of that is, what they're planning and just sort of like that they're getting people ready for a Chinese Mao Zedong type great leap forward, which is not going to be good. And if you do find yourself in an apartment, I would certainly be looking to get out of that apartment and get onto even a small piece of land. Because the more land that you have, the greater your chances are going to be that you're actually going to make it. And I know that Vincent in the past has said that it's almost impossible to live any sort of really self-sufficient life on under 40 acres. I would say because I live in a eucalyptus forest, which is quite an open forest, and then I have basically farmland underneath, grass growing and this sort of thing. So I would say I have 20 acres of woodland, and then I have 20 acres of grassland underneath it. So in seasonal grassland, and but once again, that's 40 acres. If you can get that, that would be ideal. If you can't, if you can only afford a smaller piece of land, then you have to make do with what you have. Or if you only have a smaller piece of land, then you will have to be more creative and you'll have to make do with what you have. But like I say, keep optimistic. And treat it as a new beginning, not as, and don't go into a great sense of grieving of what you lost. Because ultimately, at the end of it, we will get through this. And on the other side, I believe that it will be a better world, but not in the way that Bill Gates and Fauci and all the rest of them think it's going to be. Well, this is the end of the broadcast. God bless you all, and I'll see you all next week. I'll see you later.